Aseity, Contingency, Leibniz. Hello everyone, my name is Persohn. You can contact me at pastor@mascot.church if you like. That's my email address, or in the comments below. If you like, share, and subscribe to this video or this channel, YouTube might recommend it to somebody else. We don't monetize the channel, but who knows? And I do thank you for visiting with me. Arguments for the existence of God. Why do we use them? What are they about? What is my formulation, kind of my favorite go-to that I use, and why? Well, the favorite argument for the existence of God that I use in the day-to-day when the opportunity arises is based on Leibniz's contingency argument. So we'll just take a look at the word contingent for a moment. I'll pop it up on the screen, and then we're going to look at another definition before I come back with you. So let me just do this here, back to our PowerPoint. And the first thing we want to do is have a look at the word contingent. And this is occurring or existing only if certain circumstances are the case. It's dependent. So it's dependency. Thing that is contingent upon something else is dependent upon something else. So Leibniz's contingency argument has entirely to do with one thing being dependent on another, and all things ultimately being dependent on someone who is not dependent on anything. Okay, now another word that we do need to have a little look at today is the word aseity, and this is a quality of God. There are no absolute qualities of God. That is, there's no one quality of God that I would consider to be greater than another, his aseity over his holiness or his mercy or whatever. No, but probably a good place to get people to when they begin to question, they begin to want to know, is this quality of God, which is his aseity. And look at this from Merriam-Webster. It is the quality or state of being self-derived or self-originated, specifically the absolute self-sufficiency, independence, and autonomy of God. Now, this is a quality of God, or an attribute that is not spoken about often enough. If I was ever going to write a book on the attributes of God, it would be on this topic. This is that God exists in and of himself. If you look at these, what you would call arguments or discussions about the existence of God, they very frequently have aseity as their platform. We're going to take people to a place where we want them to consider whether something can exist in and of itself, and if that thing can be personal. Now, I would need to say that I am what's called a presuppositionalist. I don't believe that a natural argument ever causes anybody to come to God. I believe that the Holy Spirit does that. Nevertheless, these discussions are great topic openers. They easily help you get into that discussion. They also have another quality, another ability. That is, they work to, as John Calvin said, to shut the mouth of the obstreperous, not all the obstreperous. In other words, there are people who are going to give you trouble for your position. Some are just going to give you trouble no matter what. They'll never talk about it. They'll just continue to give you trouble. You'll just have to learn to live with them. But there's others who are of a different spirit. And once you begin to share that you have reasons for believing what you do, they tend to treat you differently. Listen, I've had that happen in the workplace. I'm in secular work. I've been in secular work for many years. I've been bivocational. And it is surprising once you put forward a couple of points about your position on the existence of God, that people are more inclined to become your friend than your enemy. It's just really interesting. Now, you have to be careful, and you're going to realize there are people who will hate you even more. That's the way of the world. Well, I want to take you to our steps, the steps that I use. It's my formulation, the one I kind of keep in my head. I'll start the discussion, if I can, with one of the 7 steps. And we'll look at them quickly, but spend a little bit more time on the step that has to do with cosmology, because that's coming up in some work that I'm doing. First of all, though, before the steps, there's a question that Leibniz had. So I'm not using Leibniz's exact argument. I'm using something that kind of works for me, but it's a formulation based around that, okay? Now, Leibniz began with this question, and let me just see if I can just pop that up on the screen here. And the question is this: why is there something rather than nothing? Okay, why is there something rather than nothing? This is really a question about our very existence in many ways too. So let's just come to these 2 points here. First thing I want to do in this discussion with somebody who engages me is I want to point them to the Aseity of God. Now, I always have my scriptures ready. I always have my Bible handy. I always have John 1 in mind, and 1 John 1, both those passages, and maybe God's discussion with Job, or the revelation of himself through Isaiah to Cyrus, before Cyrus was born, something like that. Always have them ready to go. But I want to get this journey going. I want to get people thinking about this. So I want them to consider one question. Why is there something rather than nothing? Also want to drive people to Aseity. Let's hop into our steps today. I'll pop them up on the screen here. Why is there something rather than nothing is our question. The first point that I like to raise, that I like to have in my head, is ex nihilo nihil fit, from the Latin, probably pronounced very badly, but essentially it's this: from nothing, nothing comes. And this is used more in philosophy than anything else, but also used in theology, and that is, how can something come from nothing? And if there is nothing, nothing can't produce something. And usually you'll have no disagreement with that, because when we say nothing, we mean no thing. We mean no heat, no light, no space, no up, no down, no dark, no left, no right, no electricity, nothing, 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 zero, nothing. And someone says, what about the blackness of space? No, that's something. Okay, so we're talking about from nothing, nothing comes. So on to our second point here. And so this is this one that it's no problem. People will go for that without a problem. We're going to dig a little bit deeper. We're going to just move a little further into what this implies, what it implies to say from nothing, nothing comes. There was a time when any particular thing was not. In that case, something other than that particular thing caused it to be. We'll read that once more. There was a time when any particular thing was not. In that case, something other than that particular thing caused it to be. Now, I'm not here making a differentiation between the created and the uncreated order. We're talking about those things that we know. So I have in my hand my coffee cup. I've used this so often. There was a time when it was not. So something other than it caused it to be. I don't tend to have a problem with that. No one I've ever spoken to has really struggled with that. I'm going to have a sip of coffee. Oh, that's nice. There was a time when the coffee in it was not. Something other than it caused it to be. Now, I only formulated this morning with hot water and coffee, joined it all up together. That's only the last portion of that. But of course, what caused the water to be, the coffee, and so on. Let's go back to our step. So that becomes step 2. And we'll come back now to our third step, which is a logical follow-on from that. And that is this one, which is nothing can be self-caused, or it would bring itself into being. Even an omnipotent being cannot cause itself to be. Nothing can be self-caused, or it would bring itself into being. Even an omnipotent being cannot cause itself to be. So my coffee cup cannot be self-caused. If it would be self-caused, it would have to exist before it existed. Again, no one's going to really struggle with that, are they? Oh, this thing caused itself to be. To cause requires intention, requires an action. How can it happen? Are we still making sense? It's really quite logical here. Let's go on to my next step. Let's come on to the next one here. And by the way, notice we said even an omnipotent being cannot cause itself to be. Even God cannot self-cause himself, which is very interesting. So now we're going to get to this aseity thing. We're on the home stretch. An existing thing cannot have a non-existing thing as its cause. Nothing can have nothing as a cause. Let's try this again. An existing thing cannot have a non-existing thing as its cause. Or nothing can have nothing as a cause. Okay? So in the last phrase, no thing can have nothing as a cause. So here's my coffee cup. An existing thing cannot have something that does not exist as its cause. So you would say, well, how did this come into being? Well, something that doesn't exist or never existed. That's just not possible. And again, we're just driving back to this question of why is there something rather than nothing? And we're coupling this with our need to consider the aseity of God. Okay, so I'm going to pop this one up on the screen again because we're now taking a slightly more refined journey. We're refining our position a little bit more. So let's put this up again. An existing thing cannot have a non-existing thing as its cause, or nothing, that is, no thing, can have nothing as a cause. All things are dependent on something else. So this follows on to this discussion. And this is the contingency element here, the dependency. Everything depends on something else. So let's look at the hardest mineral that you know, maybe the hardest thing you know, the most durable thing, a piece of titanium or maybe diamond or something like that. Even that piece of titanium depends on something. You get it hot enough, under enough pressure, and atomically it will start to break down. The diamond, you can crush it, you can turn it into powder, you can dissolve it, etc. The titanium can be dissolved as well. So everything depends on something in one way or another. Of course, my coffee cup is very fragile. If I drop it on a hard surface, it'll break, no problem at all. It's also dependent on the temperature that exists. You get it too hot, it'll melt, and so on. Well, we know that everything is dependent on something else. Now, this we see in creation, and we see it very, very clearly. We're just going to look at the cosmology of this for a moment, and this is where we'll camp a little longer than we do when I normally present this topic. We understand full well by observation and by mathematics and by measurement and so on that the moon orbits the Earth around the equator, and we have measured that many times. We've measured the distance to the moon. We've measured it for over 100 years with Earth-Moon-Earth communications. We've measured it now with lasers, with masers, with all sorts of technology, with VHF. It's very, very precise. We know where it is, what its size is, and so on. It depends on the Earth. It is drawn orbitally to the Earth. That's just the way that it works. And as the moon rotates, it rotates around the Earth at the same time. So God has set this up that we always see the same face of the moon. Really, really wonderful how all this works. It's magnificent clockwork. We also have learned, and we can see, that the Earth spins. Before an airplane takes off from the ground, a commercial jet, it actually measures the spin of the Earth. That's how it locates itself on the longitudinal and latitudinal position, which is very, very interesting. It can measure that spin of the Earth. There's other technology around that can do that too. So it knows at the equator, actually it's easier to measure the spin than it is at closer to the poles, which is just fascinating stuff. So the measurement, the spin of the Earth has been measured, the spin of the moon. The Earth orbits the sun. And we've learned as well that the sun rotates, and that's also fascinating. We can observe the planets, we can observe them rotating, we can observe them in orbital patterns around the sun, and that's also fascinating. And we can predict exactly where they're going to be at any one time because we understand orbital dynamics. So people who would say, oh, the planets are, just painted on the sphere around the Earth or whatever, can never predict their location. They can't predict eclipses or anything of the sort because, of course, they're using mathematics that doesn't exist. But once you understand the orbital dynamics of things, you can predict the location of the planets, location of the stars, location of the moon, and so on with surprising accuracy. Just wow. Okay, and but we can see that we then orbit the sun. So the moon orbits the Earth. It's dependent on the Earth. The Earth orbits the sun. It's dependent on the sun. We've come to learn that the sun orbits some elements in the galaxy. It's dependent on that. As we grow more and understand more, we'll note that those elements orbit something else. Everything in the natural realm depends on something else, and that's in that highest of creation. Now, we've also seen God put his stamp on other things in other ways in the creation. You can look at a leaf and cut it down the middle. You'll note that it is chiastic, which is fascinating, just like your hands. The chiastic element of God's communication exists all through creation as well, which is really, really fascinating. Just another topic altogether, but not for today. So all things are dependent on something else. When we look up, When we look down, when we look at the smallest things that we know, everything is dependent. Truly, you are totally dependent on so much. You're dependent on enough air, enough temperature, enough water, enough everything. The tiniest shift in the amount of temperature that you experience is enough to kill you in terms of the temperature we know. I mean, you light a fire, it's a lot hotter. You can't live in that. Okay, you go to your freezer, it's so cold you couldn't live there for long. Especially if you weren't dressed for it, you'd freeze too. And then we're aware of substances that are vastly colder: liquid nitrogen, liquid oxygen. Human body immediately would break down in that scenario. And so there's no question. We're only going to survive in the tiniest little temperature range that exists only. The same with air pressure, water pressure, water quality, and so on. We need a very, very, very limited amount of those things, or we're dead. We are highly dependent, super dependent. Our souls are dependent on God. And this is this whole sense of the dependency argument. It's a really fascinating argument, really worth talking about. So all things are dependent on something else. I've gotten a bit away here. Let me go back 2 points, and then we'll tick very quickly into our final points here as we look at this discussion about a variation of Leibniz's marvelous contingency argument. Put this back up on the screen here. I'm going to go just back 2 more. Nothing can be self-caused, or it would bring itself into being. Even an omnipotent being cannot cause itself to be. An existing thing cannot have a non-existing thing as its cause. Nothing can have nothing as a cause. And all things are dependent on something else. Okay. All effects, things, or actions have causes. All causes precede their effects. This is also very important. All effects, things, or actions have causes, and all causes come before or they precede their effects. You would never say that an effect comes after a cause. You'd never say that. So all causes precede their effects. So what caused the water to get hot? Okay, where certain elements of heat and certain things had to come together, and the cause came before the effect of heat. And no one is going to argue with that. Now, we've got ourselves in an interesting place. We've continued to go back now. We've looked at all causes. We've looked at all things are dependent. We've thought, okay, and we're making a journey now back, either back in time or back in reality or back in whatever, however you want to do that. And our next element here is a very important, all of these are important, but our next element kind of forces us to do something and come to a kind of conclusion. At least it forced me to do that, and many who think deeply about it. Let's pop it up on the screen. If you go back far enough, you would end up with nothing. No thing. Truly, follow our discussion. Follow the points that we've raised and continue to go back and continue to go back and continue to go back. Ultimately, you end up with nothing. You realize that everything had to have a thing before it, had to have something that caused it, had to have some effect, is dependent on something, and you keep backstopping and going back and going back and going back. This is the nature of this discussion here. And this then asks us to consider again the question, why is there something rather than nothing? Why is there something rather than nothing? Now, you'll notice today I did not pop any scriptures up on the screen. I probably should have done that, but I will encourage you to read John 1 and 1 John 1, and also the last couple of chapters of the book of Job, where God reveals himself to Job. And you'll find he talks about himself and his glory and his ability to do all of those things. And I thumped the microphone again. I'm going to have to stop doing that. But there we go. So this takes us back now to the why is there something rather than nothing. The way the contingency argument works is that it takes the elements that exist today, the things that we can see, hear, taste, touch, and smell, or that we need tools to measure. We might not be able to see, hear, taste, touch, and smell them all, things like radio waves or light in certain ranges or whatever, certain chemical elements. But we draw the same conclusions. These things could not have been self-caused. Something had to bring them into being. The thing that brought them into being had to exist before those things and could not have been self-caused. We now drive back to the need to have something that was not self-caused. something that exists in and of itself, something that is not dependent on anything else, something that has no, that cannot be moved by the created order. And that something then, that someone, we understand to be God. Now, again, as I've said, I'm a presuppositionalist. I'm not leaving people there. I'm taking them straight to the scriptures whenever they're ready to go there. But this discussion then helps me to set the stage. It also helps to engage people who just want to talk a little bit more about it. And you know that this is a very useful way if you're in the workplace and you're having problems with people of other religions. That I've not really had that very often. I've not had difficulties in the workplace with Jews or Muslims or Buddhists or Hindus. Typically, it's like, you got your belief, I'll leave you alone. But sometimes that can be the case. But you can certainly build very warm relationships with them based around these discussions as well. And I've done that, and I found that to be really, really helpful. So that's good. So, ladies and gentlemen, this has been a quick look at aseity, which is the self-existence of God, aseity, contingency, and Leibniz's argument, and of course Leibniz's question, why is there something rather than nothing? Thank you for visiting with me today.